Hello, everybody. This is April Dawn Harder, licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and educator for narcissists, and those who also want to learn more about narcissism, period. So in this clip from Deadline on MSNBC, I want to break down, I want to do a little bit of a breakdown of what I'm observing. So let me set up the scene. There were some clips about Joe Biden expressing empathy for, 9/11. After 9/11, there was a clip, and then there was another clip, I believe in 2015. So the commentators are reflecting on the impact that Joe Biden has had in the past. And I'm going to give you commentary.
I wouldn't talk like that. We are so starved of this sort of language of grief and loss.
What are the traits of a leader? It's three things. It's honesty, it's empathy, and it's having a vision.
Now, I just want to pause there for a second because it was said that there's three traits to being a leader: honesty, empathy, and having a vision. I would add a fourth element to that, and that's narcissism recovery. And I say that seriously because the reason why there is political corruption is because you can actually have a vision, have empathy, and etc. But that empathy, without accountability, that results in corruption, right? So as a leader, as leaders, we need to basically, we need to be able to face the ways in which our attachment wounds from childhood continue to be reenacted in our interpersonal relationships, right? Both personally and professionally, okay? We're going to, like I said, we're going to get into this, but if you omit that narcissism aspect, that's why we continue to have unchecked power in society.
It's an honesty to confront a problem and say, we have a problem, and here's the loss, here's the problem. The empathy is the most important part, and I understand and I can feel it. I feel you, and you feel that from him. And the third part is having a vision about how we're going to solve it.
Now, let me go ahead and just, again, pause. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is very much condolences for a loss. Empathy really means you've been there, done that. But in order to, I do agree that Joe Biden absolutely, in many ways, can absolutely, truly empathize with Americans. But there are other ways where, he has failed to empathize with Americans, right? So let's continue.
The problem. Here's the problem. In one of your earlier segments, you were showing a crowd at a Trump rally or an anti-coronavirus rally, and somebody held up a sign that said, 99% survival rate is not an emergency, which that's the mindset of somebody. If you were in a movie theater with 100 people and one person was going to die, the other 99 shouldn't care, shouldn't huddle around it. And that's the problem in this country, is that we have a part of this country, I'll call the ungreatest generation, that is a me culture. And if it doesn't affect me, I don't give a damn.
Okay, so now again, here's the thing. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, this is going to be kind of new information, but for those of you who follow me on Instagram, then this is information we've already talked about. So what he's describing are overt narcissists, okay, overt, but you can also be covert too and interact like that. But what he's basically talking about are overt narcissists. Instead of trying to understand the narcissist and how it's connected to mental illness, he is saying that they are that they are not a good section of the population, right? They're not good. But in reality, they're not well. Let's continue.
I mean, that sign said it all. And that's the problem. Even if you have Biden's leadership and it has those three traits, if you have a huge part of this population, and we do, and I see the sadness in your face today, Nicole. You look like you're going to cry. I feel the same way. And what it comes down to is that certain people can't be led. If you have enough people who just don't give a damn unless it affects them, it's hard to solve that problem. And we have a segment that is the ungreatest generation, and that's the sadness that we have here.
Okay. So when we call the segment of the population, and what he's referring to are the Trump supporters, right? The ungreatest generation, right? Make America, quote, great again. That doesn't actually solve the problem. What that does is it stereotypes Trump supporters. Now, this is not to say that the Trump supporters haven't done things to violate people's boundaries, because they have absolutely politically supported a racist agenda, a sexist agenda, narcissism, right? Overt narcissism and policies and all that, right? Under the Trump administration. Absolutely. But this is not going to solve the problem. That's the thing, is that a lot of the time when we are in the arena with narcissists, we don't think about mental illness, and we don't think about how we're going to solve that problem. You see, the Trump supporters, when you actually pay attention to them, many of them fall within the victim role of the Cartman drama triangle. They usually switch between the victim role and the persecutor role or the perpetrator role. Okay. Why? Because they feel that their values and their way of life has been infringed upon. So this is a perceived threat. This is a trauma response that they're having. So it's not surprising, because Donald Trump, the way that he interacts with the people who support him is, and many leaders who are his surrogates, they basically emotionally trigger their followers. They trigger their fear. Okay. And basically what I'm saying is that these followers, they definitely exhibit symptoms of PTSD. So they are often going into fight or flight response, but usually a fight response, right? And Donald Trump is teaching them, you need to go into fight response. Okay, that's why in the United States of America we have had an increase in violence and domestic terrorism. That's why we have, that's why George Floyd died. That's why, there's all these problems occurring, because Donald Trump says the solution to this when you're afraid is to fight. But that's a perceived threat. So the real problem is that these Republicans believe that there are many threats, and they are merely trying to protect themselves. That's why they are very, they are very into, gun tooting and all that. We got to protect ourselves. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself, but there's something wrong when you perceive a threat that doesn't exist and somebody gets harmed. So this is what's been happening in the history of the United States. And when you have a politician such as Donald Trump that he knows how to emotionally trigger his base, they are going to react in those two Karpman drama triangle roles. And again, this approach from Donnie Deutsch, from Deutsch Incorporated, he was a former chairman, this response is not going to solve the problem, because it really doesn't get to the root of the problem.
That can't look at that number of 3,000 and go, those are people. They can't process it. If it doesn't affect them, they can't process it. And that's sad.
But I can't imagine being in a movie theater, Donnie, and if one person started choking, everybody wouldn't get up and call 911. Like, I just refuse to believe that that's who we are. I think there's a chunk of the country that's been fed lies, and I'm not taking out their responsibility for believing the lies and being attracted to the lies. I know a lot of people who are high on the lies, myself in my own life. But I refuse to believe that we can't be led, at least some of us, to a somewhat brighter place. It is the absence of any forum for feeling the loss. Go ahead.
But maybe we have to get to a point that maybe there are 50 million jerks in this country. Maybe that's the sad truth. And how do we manage that? Because Joe Biden is doing everything right. And when you see that sign, and you see, maybe there's a chunk of us that really suck as human beings. Maybe that's a reality.
Now, that is going too far. That the reality actually is that these people, again, feel fearful. It's a perceived threat. They're reacting in a trauma response, and they completely believe it.
Eddie.
Well, I think, Donnie has touched on something. And I think that, we need a new moral and social contract between each other.
Okay, let's go ahead and stop there for a moment. A moral contract. Let's get into... So here's the deal. We're talking about earned secured attachment. We are talking about establishing, relationships. The thing is that no matter, here's the thing. There's only so much that, the law can help protect people who have been violated. And that's important and that's necessary. We have found in the history of the United States, we need to have laws to protect people from overt narcissists, right? Okay. Now, it's been hard for people to realize that narcissism has flourished in our nation because actually, again, we're not just talking about racism. What they're actually talking a lot about, they're actually getting to many different narcissistic triggers. And we're talking about a lot of what they talked about at the beginning of this segment was actually COVID-19. And so Donnie is wondering, how can these people lack empathy? And the thing is that when you're terrified, you basically have impaired theory of mind. You have mental illness. So these people need to be treated. And really the whole country needs a focus on mental wellness, right? And so then Eddie is getting into a new contract. That's not something that can just be written. We're getting into intimacy, and let's continue.
Social contract of the nation has been shredded. What are our obligations to each other?
Okay, so he said social contracts have been shredded. So actually, they've always been shredded. But it has been exacerbated by Donald Trump because he emotionally triggered Americans into a trauma response. And the solution was, the solution was to fight. Okay? And so when we say a new social contract and the social contract has been shredded, I'm pretty sure if you talk to every single American in the United States, I don't know that anyone would agree to that in America that we actually have a social contract. Why? Because in our interpersonal relationships in America, we are very much divided and have always been divided based on race, class, gender, etc. We live in a nation that is very diverse, right? And, different religions, there's just so much diversity in America. The thing is in America, we have not really fully lived by the principles of the Constitution. And that's because in the history of America, when we make laws to protect those who have been disenfranchised, there will always be people who do not want to get involved in that. That means they lack empathy, the narcissism, right? Now, let's continue.
What are our sense of concerns to each other? Death leaves this mark. It grooves its patterns in us. You don't get over it, right? And so you have people all over this country who are grieving, and as I've said before, that grief is tinged with regret because they weren't able to say goodbye right. They weren't able to say goodbye right, Nicole.
So what is he talking about? He's talking about trauma. And actually, in truth, people who have died from COVID, it has triggered actually a intergenerational trauma, actually.
And that gives death a different kind of sting. And so I think when we live, we have to kind of come to a kind of conclusion. In the theater, Nicole, some people will come to the help of that one person. Others will probably pull out their phone and start taping. Some will start, turn their attention back to the movie. So part of what we have to do is to understand that the social fabric of the country has been torn, ripped apart. So we have to imagine.
Okay, so let me make a correction there. The social fabric has not been torn apart. What has happened is that the social fabric has always been a problem. It's actually always been torn apart, but now it's been exposed because we had a president of the United States who was an overt narcissist, and he basically had values that it is morally imperative to violate other people's boundaries when you have a perceived threat of someone. That it is legal to do that, but it is actually morally wrong. So, but those people existed before Trump became president. What Trump did is that he played the role of the rescuer in the Cartman drama triangle. He was both the persecutor, but very much the rescuer to them. So that's the thing. So these people experience trauma. And it's interesting because on television, no one ever talks about what is the real or perceived, threats that Trump supporters have. Okay, nobody talks about that. People say a little bit about why they're afraid, but they turn it into entertainment by showing them really at their worst, which is, their choice. I mean, if they're recorded, that's what's going to happen, right? That's the consequence. But no one talks about the mental health of these people. No one talks about what can we do as a nation to help these people so that they are not so afraid. Instead, we have a lot of demonization of them. And that's because they now have, in many ways, been a real threat to many people. So many of them basically have perceived certain populations of people and certain mentalities, certain political leanings as a real threat to their lives. But it was an imagined threat. It was a perceived threat. And that's because they were taught misinformation. Okay. Now, then the result is that they would like to have a president who will rescue them. And that's what Donald Trump did for 4 years. He rescued these people. That's what they felt, that you're our rescuer. What we're seeing right now in the nation, about the whole, all the lawsuits against the states and the, quote, voter fraud that never happened. this has to do with the fact that these people desperately, and they will do anything, including try to overturn the law, because they're that afraid. They are terrified. They're terrified. They do not feel a sense of inner security. And when you're terrified like that, and then you are taught by your leaders to fight and violate everyone's boundaries, that's what they're going to do.
A different way of being together with each other. But death leaves its mark. My God, it does.
Okay. So I hoped you learned a lot from this clip. I'm going to continue doing these little clips, and I will be leaving them, on Instagram. And again, I hope you learn a ton. Thank you.